Our Around the World segment tonight, the Trump administration is considering pulling the U.S. out of the United Nations Human Rights Council. And according to a new expose, the council responsible for creating international human rights laws doesn't practice human rights themselves. According to the author of the expose, this has created a major threat to the environment, to climate change, to human right to life, and the well-being of the world. And with me now, that author herself of Anti-Human Rights and Anti-Environmental Practices of the UN Misused American Taxes, Pallavi Kakoti-McHugh. Pallavi, thanks for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's great to have you here. I mean, first of all, congratulations on your book, on your expose. And let me just preface this by saying you argue that you think the United States should leave the United Nations. Tell me why.
It's because of two reasons. Firstly, environment. There are a whole lot of environmental professionals out there who are not even qualified in environment or climate change. They're the ones who are teaching to the government officers and choosing PhD researchers. They do not have environmental qualifications. And when I raised the issue, they did their usual thing of discredit, cover up. I have a letter from one of the Assistant Secretary Generals of the United Nations, which I can provide in any court, where my credentials were, they said that I do not have an environmental degree. I have an environmental degree in science, in environmental law from Australia and New Zealand.
To do so, talk to me about the racial segregation thing. I mean, that's a lot worse than just falsifying an environmental degree.
Okay, because of my accent, I had this interview. I was invited in straight away because of my Indian name, and I'm married to a New Zealander, so my McHugh part of my name I didn't use it. So my name was Indian, my citizenship was Indian, and then they spoke to me, and I tripped them up. They were harassing me asking me whether I have permanent residence of Australia, what is my connection with Western countries, Australia, and I refused to answer it because I know, according to human rights law, their created human rights law, according to Australia's law, that's a discriminatory question. And then when I raised the issue, first of all, they ignored me. Then I said, I'll keep on going to the top. So I went to one of their Undersecretary Generals and I said, I'm going to go to the media. What's going on? And then all of a sudden I heard from them, because I know how they cover up, and You won't hear anything unless you mention the word media. First of all, the first thing I did notice when I entered the UN in New York, there were people whom you'd look at them and like, how did they get in? A lot of them are not even fluent in English, and they were writing legal analysis and things like that. And a lot of them didn't know basic things, which I, as an academic, as a student in New Zealand and Australia, I'd expect a first-year student to know. And what was happening was they all got in through their Young Professionals program, which I looked it up. Young Professionals program allows some countries to enter and some countries not to enter. And I was there during the economic crisis of US, and I had peers, American peers, who deserved to work at the UN, but they couldn't enter because America wasn't in the list. Last year, America is in the list. But look at, I'm from India. I was born in India. So I remember clearly during the British Raj, you had dogs and Indians not allowed kind of signboards, which is racial segregation. Same thing in South Africa. So what's the difference? These people make a human rights law. What's the difference? It's still racial segregation if you're allowing some countries to enter and some countries not to. And that means what's happening is an entire system of choose first based on race and then merit is happening. And this is the program through which you start your international civil service career. And I met so many Americans who deserve to be at the UN, and I met a lot of people who, I don't mean to be unkind, but they weren't suitable.
Right, they weren't qualified to be there. Pallavi, this is so interesting to me. This is so interesting to me, and I know you go into more detail in your book about the corruption that was rife in the UN, too, that there was lawlessness among the United Nations staff, that there was even, cover-ups of sexual abuse of starving women and children, not protecting civilians, those types of really, really serious, very egregious human rights abuses that the United Nations either knew about and covered up or actually took part in. And that I'll leave to our viewers to look up in your book. The corruption that you say is happening within the UN, you worked there, you saw this firsthand, and I want to give some examples and have you expound on them, because you say that there's some lawlessness that goes on among United Nations staff, even as it pertains to sexual abuse of starving children and women around the world.
Yes.
Pallavi, can you tell us about that?
Sexual abuse-wise, there's been sexual abuse of not just UN peacekeepers, who belong to militaries of other countries, but who are civilian UN peacekeepers, and this has been going on for around 27 years. There's a study, UN study, I've read 1996, then I've read the latest ones, 2015, and more closer to the time. And one thing which is very important, there was an independent expert report dealing with the sexual abuse of peacekeepers of 4 different countries. And that was submitted to the UN. And the UN's job, the department, was to prepare the Secretary General's report going to the ambassadors of the world. And then the prime ministers and the presidents will hear about it. But that report was crushed, and it never reached the ambassadors of the world, and a profoundly different report was submitted. I have the copies of both, and I've read them, I've compared them. This report, one of the UN staff was afraid will get squashed because it was highly critical of the UN New York staff, because lots of things, but they didn't want them to look bad, and the problem has been going on for years.
Pallavi, there's also corruption or lawlessness that you said happens when it comes to protecting civilians. Can you tell me about that?
The thing is, the Haiti issue, that United Nations are responsible for around 10,000 deaths in Haiti because their leaking pipes infected the waters of Haiti, and they had cholera. Before that, they didn't, I think for the last 100 years. And they knew about it, and they kept on saying no, 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 even when there were scientific reports linking it. And then it was last year they finally accepted, and then they say, oh, we've got diplomatic immunity. This whole diplomatic immunity, I consider it a license to kill, destroy, abuse, with zero accountability. Like I heard your previous segment about, can we sue them? You can't, because they have diplomatic immunity.
Pallavi, these allegations that you make, they're absolutely mind-boggling. I commend your bravery for exposing this, because like you said, it puts you in a position where there's a lot of power against you. A lot of people don't want you to be saying what you're saying.
Yes.
I appreciate you having the courage to come on this show, to write your book, and then come on this show and talk about it, because like you said, 10,000 deaths in Haiti. There were women and children in other countries who were sexually abused, mistreated, raped, and it was all covered up by the UN. And I appreciate you coming on the show and talking about it.